Now it's my pleasure to introduce this morning's guest, Andrew White, a Democratic candidate for governor of Texas in 2018. If Mr. White faces, at the moment now, he faces 8 fellow Democrats, not 9, 8. In the March primary, and if he wins the nomination, he'll face Republican incumbent Greg Abbott in the November general election. I guess it's possible that you run against Secede Kilgore, but I'm betting probably on Governor Abbott being the nominee. This is Mr. White's first run for elective office, although he's no stranger to politics or public service. His late father was the governor of Texas, the state's attorney general, and its secretary of state. He is an entrepreneur, the president of Sweat Equity Partners, a Houston-based investment firm, and the founder of 6 companies. A native of Houston, he has an undergraduate degree from the University of Virginia and an MBA from the University of Texas at Austin. Please join me in welcoming Andrew White. Thank you, Mr. White.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here. Put you over there.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
So you woke up today and decided. You woke up today and you decided, I'm going to go with jeans. That's what you decided.
Every day.
Every day.
Every day. I go with jeans every day. So it's the right decision.
Very good.
For no matter what you're doing.
The first
for governor or working.
The first chill governor of Texas. That's what you're running to be.
I wish my daughter thought that.
Well, all right. Show her this tape. So your dad passed last summer, and you're at the memorial for him in August, early August, and people are coming up to you, as I understand the story, saying, he meant a lot to me, the work he did as governor and over his many years in public service affected me. And you thought to yourself, I'm going to run for governor, even though I've never done this before, never been in politics before, have a job. You thought the takeaway was, I need to run for governor.
Yeah, you know, I never dreamed of running for governor, never spoke to my dad about running for governor.
So you did never have a conversation about this?
Ever.
Yeah.
Which is, of course, a huge regret now.
Yeah.
I would love to have that conversation. I'd do anything to have that conversation. But
right.
At his funeral, I heard from, person after person about the decisions that he made when he was governor. They talked about no pass, no play. They talked about seatbelt law. They talked about teachers' salaries and class sizes.
Right.
And it just so happened at the exact same time as the funeral in Austin, there was a special session going on. And the juxtaposition between hearing about the kind of leader my father was, who made tough decisions that he knew could cost him his reelection, and in fact, it ended up doing that. He lost his reelection because of those decisions. And then juxtaposed with what was happening in Austin at that exact same time, we had a governor who called a special session, which is what you do in an emergency, right? It's a special session, to pass a bathroom bill and a tree ordinance.
And a bunch of other stuff.
And there were some other things too.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, we came out of that special session with no plan for our education system and no plan for our healthcare system. So, of course, your question was about what caused me to want to enter into politics. And the answer is, I'm 45 years old. I saw what my father did. I see the lack of leadership that we have in Texas.
Yep.
And I felt like it's time for me to step up.
Had you considered Mr. White running for office before this?
Who, me?
Yeah, you.
No. This Mr. White? No.
Well, yeah, you're the only Mr. White up here that I'm aware of.
I've been busy. And it's not been something
Right.
that I've cared to do until now. Now, a few days after the funeral,
Right.
Harvey happened. And that was a whole nother experience.
Right.
Another experience, highly emotional experience.
Yeah.
And one where, I came face to face with the need for public service.
Right.
And having experienced both my father's funeral and then the Harvey experience,
Right.
I came out of that changed.
Right. Let's accept that the reaction at that moment was a noble reaction, and that the impulse to want to throw yourself into public service because of what your dad did and Harvey is great. You are, by conventional standards, not qualified to be governor.
I disagree.
True or false?
I totally disagree.
Great.
Conventional standards, I guess, would say you have to be a lawyer and you have to be in politics, and then at that point you continue your way on from step to step to step to step, starting at an office that's lower, ending up at an office that's higher.
Right.
I think the qualification for public service is having a heart to serve the public.
Right.
And what we see a lot in politics are people who have a heart to get to a higher office, who have a heart for politics and not for public service. And so I'm completely qualified for this office because I have a heart for public service.
You have a sense of what it takes to do the job, what the mechanics, the levers, and the pulleys are to do this job. I mean, look, we have a president who had not run for office, or he had run, but he really was, as far as conventional qualifications go, unqualified. You've been, as you say, as I said, you've been an entrepreneur. You started companies. You even sell yourself. Your elevator pitch involves, I've created jobs. I'm an entrepreneur. I know how to fix problems. I get all that. But just in terms of what the actual mechanics of the job are, what do you feel you know, and how much of a learning curve would you have if you were to actually win this office?
And you've mentioned it before. I'm not new to politics. I grew up in politics. I've seen it up close and personal. I've sat in the meetings. I know what kind of toll it takes on the family, because it took that toll on me. So I know the difficulties of being in public office. And from a qualifications perspective, the traits that it takes to be a leader, whether you're leading the governor's office or a business, are the same traits, right? Are you a consensus builder or are you a divider, right? Do you tackle complex problems or do you let other people figure them out? And then, of course, creating jobs is an easy word, but behind that, creating jobs is not easy to do. It's a lot more difficult.
The candidate forum in San Angelo this last couple of days that you participated in, I mean, there were a bunch of opportunities for you to appear alongside the other candidates, but the one in particular that got a lot of attention on Monday night, helpfully scheduled against the football game.
Yes.
You said, among other things, that the exact quote was, our state needs an outsider with a fresh perspective to fix this mess. Is experience a liability in politics these days, do you think?
Well, it should.
If you're selling yourself as an outsider?
Yeah, you mean political experience is a liability? It shouldn't be if you're making the kind of decisions that need to be made. I think today people are tired of the same old message where politicians are, making decisions that benefit their reelection and don't benefit the state as much. So I think if that's the model of the politician that you are, it should be a liability. Right.
So referring to you as an outsider is okay. I know that you've said many times I don't like labels, but the day that you announced, you identified yourself as a common sense Democrat. That feels like a label to me.
I know.
Can you explain what that means?
Sure.
What does it mean to be common sense Democrat?
If I have to be labeled, I want to be labeled a common sense Democrat.
What does that mean?
Well, come on, it's common sense. You should just know, right?
I'm a dumb journalist. Help me.
Here's what it should
mean.
Let me tell you what it should mean, right? It should mean that your decision making is driven by data. It's driven by facts and science. Now, you don't have to like the data, but you can't ignore the data, right? And so we have leaders who are ignoring the data. And so how do you put that into the real world, right? So universal background checks, right? This is a simple one. The data says that it wouldn't be difficult. It's not too much inconvenience to make sure that everyone who buys a gun, no matter where they buy that gun, should have a background check. To me, that's common sense. Focusing on a bathroom bill when you don't have a bathroom problem.
What if the data takes you to a place other than those in your party? If you're going to be a slave to data, or if you're going to be wedded to the idea that data drives decision making, that may actually take you out of your comfort zone or out of your ideological comfort zone, right? What if the data points you to a decision that people in your party don't agree with? What do you do then?
Well, then you have to go where the data takes you. Now, the key is understanding the data and making sure it's the correct data, right? I mean, the numbers can be manipulated in any number of ways, obviously, right? So,
and these days we have people who don't even agree on a simple set of facts. So it's possible that two different people would look at data the same way and arrive at a different conclusion.
And certainly in narrow areas where there is a lot of gray, you can have that argument, and it's appropriate. Reasonable people should be having that discussion.
But the point is, you're prepared to disagree with or to disappoint people who, like you, describe themselves as Democrats.
Yeah. Well, another example of a common sense perspective: we have a governor who denies the climate's changing. ExxonMobil doesn't deny the climate's changing. So how can our governor, who doesn't believe the science, lead us? That's not a gray area, right? That's where I think common sense has to come into play, and we're being led by people who aren't driven by those types of data.
Again, not liking labels.
Right.
You are a Democrat. You say proudly, I've been a Democrat all my life. My dad was a Democrat. I grew up a Democrat. You didn't have some kind of mid-course conversion or correction. You're a Democrat.
I'm a Democrat, 100%.
You have been, I have not found evidence of you describing yourself this way, but the media in writing about you, maybe some of the reporters actually in the room today, have called you a conservative Democrat. Is that a correct characterization?
I don't think so at all. The word conservative means different things to different people, first of all. And that's why I like this label, common sense. If you're going to pick a label, that's the label I think you should pick. In general, when you're talking about labels, no matter what issue it is, whether it's you're liberal, you're conservative, or you're pro this, you're anti that, it just creates an us versus them mentality. And then you can't make any progress at all.
Well, Mr. White, the
mentality,
whether you like the mentality or not, it exists. We just went through a presidential campaign in which the Sanders supporters and the Clinton supporters fought about where they landed on the Democratic Party continuum. Right. Those people, to some degree, will vote in this primary and will vote in this general, and they're looking to you, one imagines, to telegraph where you land on that continuum as well.
So the question, though, is as a leader, do you create more division and more us versus them, or do you create less of it by finding ways to bring people together? Right. I think today people are sick of the division that's going on, and they want a leader who will actually find ways to bring us together more. And I'm not saying this is going to be, we're all going to hold hands and sing Kumbaya, right? But this is work. But the mindset has to be there. The mindset of finding a way to make progress on difficult issues. And I don't think the mindset's there right now.
So you're not prepared to play that liberal conservative game. You just say,
I just don't want to.
I'm doing what I do.
Yeah.
But you have said, with regard to this race, I mean, in enumerating your qualifications or your appeal, you've said, I can beat Greg. I'm the guy who can beat Greg Abbott in November.
Absolutely.
You seem to be running as a November Democrat rather than a March Democrat. Is that a smart idea when you're running in a primary?
We have a 24-year losing streak.
Yes.
Right? And people are tired of losing. I'm tired of losing.
Right.
When you're nominating a candidate, you're nominating you think the best candidate to beat the incumbent.
Why are you the best candidate? I mean, whether or not it's smart running in a crowded primary to be looking ahead to November,
right,
and what that requires. What is it about you that makes you a better candidate in November than Sheriff Valdez or Mr. Payne or anybody else in the primary?
Yeah, well, besides my experience, I'm representing the interests of all 28 million Texans in the state. Not just the 200,000 fringe voters in Abbott's party. There's 28 million Texans here, right? We need a leader who will represent everyone's interests. That doesn't mean everyone gets what they want, but it goes back to finding a way to create unity and less division. And that's the kind of leadership I have. Now, from an experience side, I have the experience to do this.
But you understand that as a practical matter, you have to get through the primary to get to the general. In order to get through the primary, you've got to tap into this energy that we believe at least is legitimate out there among Democrats who are fired up, upset at the president, upset at the current system. And that energy is going to bonk like playing handball up against the wall of somebody who says, I want to be the guy who can win in November. Do you not have to be a more energetic and enthusiastic Democrat of the sort who generates traction today?
Yeah, well, I am who I am, and I'm not going to change that. I'm a Democrat, 100%.
Right.
You asked about the issues, and I think John Connolly has a great quote about issues. They asked John Connolly if he was a conservative or liberal, and his answer was, on what issue? Right? People are not labels. Right? There's issues. And so I want to get past that. But the issue about the general election, my goal is not to win the primary. My goal is to win the general election. Right? I have no interest in just winning the primary. We need to win in November. And that's what this is all about.
Well, so you want to get past the labels and get to issues. Let's get to issues. You were on the Lone Star Politics show this weekend. Gromer Jeffers, our friend in the press corps from the Dallas News, asked you about the issues that were the most important issues in your campaign. And you said education, healthcare, and property taxes would be three of those at the top of the list. Let's go right there and let's get specific, please, about those issues. So you say education is an important issue for you in your campaign. What's wrong and what would you do?
Well,
and how would you pay for it?
Right, exactly. I want to be the education governor.
Everybody wants to be the education governor.
But I'm serious about it. This is the top priority, only priority. This is the single biggest issue that I have to talk about. We're 43rd in the nation, and that should be completely unacceptable to everybody in this state because we're Texas. We should be the best. But we're settling for 43rd.
Do you have a theory as to why we're 43rd and who's responsible?
Absolutely.
Name names.
So the state has been underfunding education. They keep the mandates where they are, and then they don't pay for them, and they require the counties and the school districts to figure out a way to make it work. 10 years ago, the state's budget was north of 40, 50% towards education. Today, it's 38%. There's a problem, right? Just right there. Every year there's 80,000 new students that show up in Texas that want to be educated. 80,000 new students every year. We've got to be ahead of this curve.
So you want to fund public education at a higher level than is being funded by the state currently?
We need to fund it at a higher level for sure. And your question was, how do you pay for that?
Well, tell me how much first of all, and then tell me how you're going to pay for it. How much more do we have to put in?
Billions. We're way, way off. Education, K through 12 education is 25% of the state's budget, right? State's budget roughly $100 billion per year. So $25 billion annual budget for K through 12, right? So if you talk about billions, you're talking $2.5, $3, $4, $5 billion to move the needle in those areas. You asked about how to pay for it. There is money out there. The first way to pay for it is to stop spending $800 million on border security.
So you don't think we have a border security problem that the state needs to solve?
The state is not in charge of border security. We have senators and congressmen who, if there's a problem with our borders, need to figure out a way to solve it with the federal immigration services and border security to solve our border problem.
So any budget presented to Governor White that contained funding for border security would be vetoed or line itemed out. You would take
Absolutely.
that.
It's not our responsibility to protect the nation's borders. I believe in border security, don't get me wrong, but that's not our job. When you have the 43rd ranked schools in the nation and you're spending $800 million to protect your borders, your priorities are out of whack.
Do you think we have any problem with the border being secure, leaving aside the question of who should be responsible for fixing it or paying to fix it?
Yeah.
Do we have a problem?
We have a long track record of not having a secure border.
Right.
Right? I mean, that's obvious. And we're starting to care more about that every year.
But not our responsibility to pay for it.
It's not Texas's responsibility to pay for the United States.
So you'd commit to redirecting that $800 million into public education?
That's a big part of it.
What else?
The other part of it is we're going to close the equal and uniform property tax loophole. This is a loophole.
Explain that.
Sure. This is a loophole in our Constitution that benefits commercial property owners. When you buy a house, your house gets appraised based on your neighbors, right? And you don't have much of a choice. It is what it is, right? And you pay your property taxes and you do your part. A commercial building owner, a skyscraper owner, doesn't do the same thing. Because there's a loophole, and the judges have approved this loophole. They've confirmed it, that they can pick not their neighbors to compare their skyscraper to, but they can pick that building way over there, right? And get a valuation that could be half of what they paid.
So you close the loophole, you collect that money that's not currently being collected.
It's $5 billion. I think it could be more, but we think it's $5 billion.
So you're going to fund public education by raising taxes on businesses?
I'm going to fund education by closing loopholes.
Well, you call it what you want, I'll call it what I want. How's that whole November Republican thing working out for you? I'm Andrew White and I'm raising taxes on businesses.
It's not that easy. They need to pay their fair share. Homeowners are paying and have been paying their fair share for a long time.
Right.
We're just asking the building owners to pay their fair share as well. So this isn't about raising taxes, it's about paying their fair share.
So you think there's enough money in those two buckets potentially to put into public ed that gets you where you need to be?
Okay, so what I want to do is give teachers a $5,000 pay raise, right? So how do you fix education, right? That's a easy question and there's a hard answer to that. But I know this, one way to fix education is to pay teachers more so that we can attract the best teachers and keep the best teachers. So we have a problem in this area right now. 50% of our new teachers don't have college degrees, right? Because we can't attract them, right? We don't have the money to pay for it. So why is that? We're paying $6,000 below the national average for teachers right now. $6,000 below the national average.
Mr. White, you know the way this works, that the system of public education in the state is essentially it's a bunch of different small fiefdoms, right? So you have more than 1,200 school districts around the state, and you have all these schools underneath all those districts. The governor doesn't set teacher salaries. Right. The governor can't mandate how much teachers are paid. The governor can't force school districts to pay $5,000 or $5 more.
Right.
So how is this more than a talking point?
No, this is indicative of the problem that we have, right? It's complicated. There are different standards of living in different cities, for one thing, right? But the money still is not there. So the governor and the legislature can pass laws to tell school districts, where this money can go. We can do that. They aren't doing it right now, And I agree with you, though, that there is complication here. I'm generalizing by saying we need a $5,000 increase, because the fact of the matter is, if you live in a urban center versus a rural center, your pay scales are just
I just
different.
question whether the governor can do more than talk about this as a political talking point, whether you could actually force any school district to give a raise to a teacher.
The governor
That's what I'm asking.
The governor and the legislature have to do it together, right? But it can be done,
Anything else in the realm of education that you would come into office with, or you will campaign on in the next number of months as an agenda item for yourself?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of issues, but funding is obviously the most important one right now. So you mentioned, how does this work with property taxes? We've got a messed up education finance system. I have yet to meet somebody, literally, who can explain it to me. The algorithm and how they determine where the money goes and who gets the money, then who has to pay it back out, is incredibly complicated, and it shouldn't be, right? So we have to fix that problem so that we can put more money into our schools. And those schools, whether you live in a high dollar district or a low dollar district, our children should have the same education.
So you're basically looking to do, this is the common conversation at the moment, is shift the burden away from local property taxpayers, on whom it has increasingly been put, back to the state.
Yes.
That's what you want to do.
Yes, exactly.
What about the question of school choice or vouchers, however you want to label it, that continuum that has been a political controversy over the last couple of years?
Vouchers scare the heck out of me. They scare the heck out of me because if we don't stop, if we don't win the governor's office in November, if we don't win the lieutenant governor's office in November, and if the new Speaker of the House comes from the same school of government as Dan Patrick, then we're going to have vouchers, right? I mean, who's going to stop it? Joe Strauss is gone. We will have vouchers. We've talked about how big a problem it is with our schools today, how big a problem their funding is today. Now, you add vouchers to that mix, and you're going to see schools failing.
What is your objection, specifically? What is your objection to vouchers? Or some modified voucher program?
Yeah, our tax money should go into our public schools, not into private schools. If someone wants to send their kids to private schools, that's wonderful. Let them do that. That's their choice, right? But the state and our taxes shouldn't go towards that, right? The schools need all the money they can get. It just doesn't make any sense. The deal I would make with vouchers is this: when our schools are the best in the nation, and they're completely funded, and we have so many great things going on in our schools.
Right.
If you want to do a voucher then, okay, fine, do a voucher then. But until that happens, why would we even be having that conversation?
So any legislation passes while you're governor that is a voucher program, kind of
veto it
full
in
on
a heartbeat.
Veto it. You mentioned health care to grow more as a second issue that you're concerned about. Texas continues to have the highest percentage and the highest raw number of citizens without health insurance of any state in the country. It's less than it used to be, but we don't know what the impact of defunding the Obamacare mandate is going to be on the state. In the meantime, the population of the state is growing pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So this continues to be, and a significant portion, maybe as much as we spend on education in the all funds budget is healthcare. It's
the biggest
close.
portion.
Right. So what's your answer? Certainly expanding Medicaid would have been an option for a previous Republican governor, but that's really no longer an out. And it's unclear exactly what the federal government is going to do other than provide potentially more flexibility to the state to solve its own problem. Mm-hmm. So what's your answer on this?
Okay, so first of all, healthcare is the biggest line item in the budget. Healthcare and education, 1 and 2, you put those together, that's 70%. So this is, if our governor spends 70% of his time on something, it should be these two issues, right? We need to expand Medicaid. That's a no-brainer. It hasn't been done.
Right.
It's our tax money. We have $6 billion a year that's just waiting for us to accept it. And because Abbott doesn't want to be associated with Obamacare, he refuses to cash that check.
But that, Mr. White, that option will not be, you're governor in November or January of next year. I can assure you that option will not be available. Unless we build a time machine, that option is not going to be available to you.
Yeah.
So rather than talk about what you would have done, what will you do?
Let me tell you, the money's there, and we need to get access to it. So that's a huge, huge mistake, and we're digging a big hole because of that. And I will work to get access to Medicaid, first of all. Secondly, we've got to get smarter with health care. We have universal health care right now. It's called the emergency room, right? And that's a problem. You want the most expensive health care in the nation?
Right.
Go to the emergency room, right? So I hear stories about, and one in particular, a man who was dealing with some mental health issues, and he checked himself into the ER, and they couldn't service what his needs were. He needed an expensive prescription. And the next day he kept hearing things and did the right thing and checked himself again back. And he did that 30 days. His bill was $900,000. He needed a $900 prescription, right? So that model is the model we have today.
And the uncompensated care costs get passed along to everybody.
It absolutely does.
In the form of property taxes, right?
These, again, one more example of the state passing on its opportunity or its obligation to its people, to the counties. And this is why property taxes are a problem, because those property taxes are the last resort. The counties have to pay for these things. And that's why most county judges, certainly the county judges in the big counties in Texas, are all in favor of expanding Medicaid.
I hear what you're saying, and I think that very few people in the state would disagree that we have a problem, and in fact with the specific way that you've identified the problem, but I'm waiting to hear what the practical solution is. Presumably you come into office with a plan. Beyond we need to access more Medicaid dollars, is there anything specifically that you're recommending that the state do?
We need real leadership and attention and focus on this issue, and it's a roll up your sleeves type issue, and the example I gave of finding ways to find people other alternatives besides the emergency room to get their health care is core to improving the cost structure of health care in our state.
Right.
So it's a roll up your sleeves type issue.
But you don't have specifics.
And I'm not convinced that we can't expand Medicaid. You know, that's the money's still there. We still pay into it. Now, granted, there's a lot of hurdles and obstacles to do that, but it's a big number, $6 billion a year on a $100 billion budget. That moves the needle.
So fixing healthcare, fixing education are both issues that align squarely with the Democratic Party orthodoxy or with the mainstream.
I think it aligns with Texans.
Well, but you're running for the moment as a Democrat. I want to stay on this question of where you align with and don't align with Democrats. On at least two issues that I'm aware of, there's been some discussion of whether you align with the base of the party or with the largest numbers of the party. One of these is on the issue of reproductive choice. Mm-hmm. You told my colleague Patrick Svitek on the day, and not just him, but I know that you told him on the day that you announced for governor that you are, quote, deeply personally pro-life.
Yes. That's a personal view I have.
Right. You asserted this does not make me anti-choice, but there are people in the party, including the last candidate for governor, Wendy Davis, who disagree with you. In fact, Wendy Davis has called you anti-choice. Others in the party, on the progressive wing of the party, have called you anti-choice.
I disagree
and have questioned where you are on this issue versus the mainstream of the party.
Absolutely. Almost everything you just said, in a nice way.
Well, did you not say that you were deeply personally pro-life?
Yeah, absolutely. From a personal perspective.
Did you not say you were anti-choice?
No, I never said I was anti-choice. Wendy said that.
You said that it does not make you anti-choice.
Right.
And you believe that. You stipulate that.
Exactly.
Okay.
I trust women to make their own health care decisions. Period. End of story.
Right.
Right. Roe v. Wade, I support. It's the law of the land. Been that way for 40 years. And let me be even more clear. As governor, all these bills that come out restricting a woman's right to choose, I veto those bills. Now, my personal beliefs are my personal beliefs.
Right.
And this is a choice that my wife and I wouldn't make. Yeah. It's a choice we wouldn't have our children make.
So this is the Tim Kaine or the Bob Casey position. There are definitely personally pro-life Democrats. I mean, John Sharp at one time when he was in politics was a personally pro-life Democrat.
And Wendy and I have been trading text messages, and we'll be speaking together. So she came out and said the anti-choice thing before my whole views were out there. And frankly, I can do a better job explaining my position. This was early on in the campaign. I was a candidate for just a few days. So, anyway, I think it's not as big a deal as it's being made out to be.
Okay, so that's not an obstacle you think with Democrats?
I don't think it's an obstacle at all.
With Democrats in the main. At the debate on Monday, I heard you say that you were supportive of fracking, or that you believed that fracking had a place in the conversation in Texas, although you believed that there was work that needed to be done in terms of appointing the right people to be in the business of regulating that as an issue. You were concerned about the environment. Do you believe that taking a position that is essentially supportive of fracking with limitations is also one that will appeal to Democrats?
Yeah, because in Texas, oil and gas is the bedrock of our economy. Yeah. It builds our schools. It pays for our hospitals. It keeps our roads, safe. Pays for the law enforcement. Yeah. It is what it is. It doesn't mean that you can't also care about alternatives. And this goes back to this sort of either or, us versus them mentality. That doesn't work, And so, in my view, you can have safe fracking because we need real regulatory control. When you appoint people to regulate your environment, our president has appointed an EPA director who has fought the EPA his entire career. It's unbelievable. We have an education secretary who really doesn't believe in public schools. And that same Trump school of government mentality we see in Texas. We have regulators who don't really care about regulating the environment. They're overstaffed, or they're understaffed, I should say. They're overworked. And the penalties that get placed on multi-billion-dollar companies for massive environmental infractions are petty and minor. So we can do both. You can have fracking. And I realize that some people in the party don't want any fracking whatsoever at all.
Right.
What I also believe is that if your local government outlaws fracking, if a city council says we're not going to have fracking, or if a county says we're not, absolutely. This is a local control issue as well.
So that's another case where the governor has limited ability to impact the debate, except with the veto pen. So as you know, the residents of Denton in the last election cycle, the 2014 statewide election cycle, voted to outlaw fracking. Legislature came back in and said, oh, no, you didn't. Passed HB 40, bill was passed, goes to the governor signs it, and that's it. So you're saying to me, to us, that if that's sort of legislation, voters vote on X, legislature seeks to undermine or to overturn the will of the voters at a local community like Denton, goes to your desk, you veto that bill.
I believe in local control.
Yeah.
Our governor does not believe in local control.
Governor says that local control actually is a fundamental part of his agenda.
That's what he says. He doesn't actually believe that, because when it comes to bathrooms and trees and fracking and whatever else he feels like on his social agenda, the local control doesn't actually apply to that. His big Texas plan, which I don't know if you spent any time on his website, but he's got a Texas plan, which is a big name for a big plan. And it's to get the federal government off the backs of the state government. And he prides himself on that. That's his big idea.
Like the governor before him.
The problem with that is he's doing the exact same thing he's angry about, the federal government being on the backs of the state government. He's doing the exact same thing to local government.
Right, of course, the response to that, Mr. White, is that the states created the federal government, and the states also created the municipalities, that actually the state is the sovereign in this case, and the state is perfectly, this would be the governor's answer.
Sure.
And the answers of others who think that the state is not over regional local control is the state absolutely has the authority to regulate what happens at the state, at the municipal level, if they believe that municipal authorities are overreaching.
And that's why we have a judicial system to work out those sorts of issues. Right. But the fact of the matter is, bathrooms and trees and these sorts of issues are best left to the local authorities.
So I mentioned fracking and the choice issue as two issues that have spiked up as potential areas of disagreement with some Democrats. Are there other areas where you believe your policy positions on big issues or small might run afoul of the March Democrats?
I don't know. For me, gerrymandering is a big issue. I don't know if this is something that the Democrat or the Republican Party, stand behind. But for me, gerrymandering is.
Unless you tell me that you're for gerrymandering, I suspect you and the Democrats are aligned.
Right. It doesn't matter which side you're on. It depends if you're in control or not in control, I guess. But the fact of the matter is, our entire system is built on picking representatives to represent us, and their districts make no sense whatsoever. And we should have a competitive process. I feel like you don't need term limits, although I like term limits, but if you have real districts that are competitive, that essentially becomes a term limit. Because you can't be way off on the extreme knowing that that's just going to make the fringe voters in your party vote for you, and you're going to get reelected because you win the primary, and that's all you have to worry about is the primary.
Mr. White, you and I are old enough, not everybody in this room is, but you and I are old enough to remember when Democrats still ran the state. Your dad, when he was governor, was one of those Democrats who ran the state at a time when Democrats were in control of the process of running the state, including redistricting.
Sure.
Isn't it the case that Democrats did exactly then what the Republicans are doing now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Were they wrong then to control the means of drawing those lines? Was your dad wrong?
Yeah, listen, I don't remember where he was on gerrymandering. It's possible that he didn't.
I'm guessing that he liked the system that it is now because Democrats were in charge.
Yeah, well, maybe so. But the reality of it is, for this system to work, this system that we call representative government, we need to do a better job at representing.
So even if Democrats were to take back every state office, every office involved with redistricting, and they suddenly were back in charge of drawing the lines, your answer would be take the power away from the Democrats who've now taken control of the state and give it to some wonks.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think a citizen organization should be picking our districts, not politicians. Period. End of story. That's all that matters.
Right.
And here's another thing. whoever gets to win this election coming up in November is a redistricting cycle.
It is.
So the governor's seat and the representatives and the senators, it's happening now. We're on the edge. I really think we're on the edge of something very, very significant here, because with Speaker of the House Strauss now leaving, if his replacement comes from the sort of the Trump school of government thought, and we've got Abbott and Patrick there, like I mentioned before, we'll have vouchers, we'll have a bathroom bill, right? And forget the discrimination for a second. Think about the jobs that could go away from that, right? Amazon.
And you assume that specifically in the case of the Speaker's office, just to go to that for 1 second, that the person who occupies that job will be so consequential in that, even though the composition of the House is not likely to change dramatically, and if it does, it may change more in your direction than away from it. You still think that because a new Speaker's in office, suddenly the levee will be breached?
If that new Speaker comes from the Trump school of government, which is where Abbott and Patrick come from,
right,
then we will have vouchers, bathroom bills, and we will have a completely gerrymandered district system for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm very nervous about where we're headed, and I think people across Texas are as well. They're figuring out that we are being led by extremists, by people who don't believe in math. Think about that for a second.
What does it tell you, though, Mr. White, if the state, let me take you seriously here when you say the state is being led by extremists. The last statewide election, the person who is playing to the extremists from a policy standpoint won by 20 points. Is the problem that the people who lead the state are extreme, or that the people who voted for them and therefore the people who live in the state are extreme? Like, who's to blame? Is Abbott the problem, or are Texans the problem?
Right. You know what? That election, 2014, was pre-Trump. And just like the BC-AD divide, I feel like life has changed right when Trump was elected. Things are. One of the things that I feel strongly
about. So if that
about,
election were held now, you think the outcome
it would be
you think the outcome would have been different?
In this election, any Democrat's going to do a lot better because of that issue on its own. Because people see they see the extremism. Dan Patrick's been there for a long time, and right, and then Abbott's been following him, and then Trump's just blown the whole thing up, right? Yep. So I think this is a different time. We live in a post-Trump world. And one thing that I want to make very clear is that this is not normal. We live in a political climate, and the way it is not normal. And if we ever think it's normal, then shame on us. This is not a normal time that we live in. And we have to do something about it.
When you said the other day at the debate, this is your quote with regard to President Trump. Then I want to come back to Abbott and one more thing before we open it up for questions. This was your quote the other night at the debate. We live in Trump's prison now, and I'm trying to break Texas out. It's time for a change. We have to fight Donald Trump and the lies he stands for every day. So just as Republicans in the past have nationalized governor's races, they didn't run against Wendy Davis so much as Obama, or they're not running against the congressional candidate who might be a Democrat so much as Pelosi. You intend to nationalize this governor's race and run against Trump.
I want to bring sanity and reason back to our government so that Texans can have hope again. And that means fighting Trump, that means fighting Abbott, and it means fighting Dan Patrick as well. I'm fighting all of them. I'm running for governor because I think that's the area where I have the most ability to have the most change but I'm fighting all of the extremism.
Right. So in order to get, I know you want to talk about November, but in order to get to November, you have to get through March. The other leading Democrat, it's generally believed in this race, is Sheriff Lupe Valdez, former sheriff of Dallas County. What do you think about her?
We got to meet for the first time. She's a very nice lady. I don't know where she stands on the issues, but I respect her public service. She's got 12 years as a sheriff and years before that working in public service, and I respect that very much.
She's been a fairly outspoken critic of the sanctuary cities legislation that was passed and signed in this last session. Are you 100% with her on that? Do you oppose that legislation?
Yeah, I oppose it because it's discrimination. I oppose it because...
What about it is discriminatory?
It gives local police officers the ability to ask for your papers. They can ask you to prove your citizenship. And that's just scary, right? They're not going to ask me to prove my citizenship because of the color of my skin, right? We know how this is going to work. Based on the color of your skin is who they're going to ask to prove their citizenship. And we're Americans here. That's not how things work in America. So this is another example of Greg Abbott, where he's passed a state law to require local police officers to enforce federal immigration law. And that's strange to me. What's also strange is every major city police chief told Governor Abbott not to pass sanctuary cities law. They said it would make us less safe. Going back to being a common sense Democrat, a person who follows the data, follows the facts, if the major city police chiefs tell me not to do something, I'm pretty much not going to do it. I mean, you have to respect the fact that these guys know what they're doing out there. And sure enough, after that law is passed, we've seen some data in Houston where sexual assault reporting in the Hispanic community has gone way down. That's not because sexual assaults have gone way down.
Right.
It's because people are afraid to report sexual assaults because they're afraid to be asked to prove their citizenship.
So, during the debate at the Capitol last session, Mr. White, there was a truing up of this legislation. It began as show us your papers upon arrest. It then became show us your papers upon detention, right? So the so-called Schaefer Amendment made this a couple clicks to the side.
In order for it to pass.
Would you have been willing to support legislation of this sort that was not as far out? Would you have gone with would you be more comfortable with a more modest bill?
We don't have a sanctuary city problem in Texas. We really just don't. This is another example of a solution in search of a problem. The data isn't there to support that.
And so when Governor Abbott said at one point last year during the debate, indicating his desire to see this legislation passed, that he believed that local officials who did not do as he wished should potentially be subject to having their offices removed or removed from offices. How do you feel about that?
Well, of course not. And making matters worse, I've spoken to several people who said he's removed the funding from their budgets if you don't play his game. To me, that's just part and parcel of the whole problem.
You have 54 days until the primary. You got to win. It's again a 9-candidate field now.
Yep.
Hard to imagine that this is not going to go to a runoff based on the sheer numbers, but maybe it won't. Do you play golf or tennis for the next 54 days? Is it you do you time for the next 54 days and don't worry about the other candidates, or do you have to run against them in order to win the primary?
I'm getting my message out across the state. We do have a short timeline. They moved the primary date up. We have the earliest primary in the nation, which means we don't have a lot of time to get the word out.
Right.
And it's going to be challenging, frankly, to do that. I am full-time every day of the week working on this campaign. This is my number one priority, and raising money is going to be a big part of it.
How much did you raise? You announced on December the 7th, so you only had about 3 weeks and plus in the last part of the year. We have not seen your fundraising numbers yet. Why don't you tell us now? Look, all the reporters from the press corps here, you could just efficiently tell everybody at once.
We're filing on Monday, I think, so the number's coming.
Come on, you know the number.
I'm
you
not
could
going
just
to give you
tell
the
us
number.
now. Why not?
The suspense. I like the suspense, right? You got to keep it interesting. Something to talk about for Monday. But I will say this.
Does it have 5 figures? Does it have 4 figures?
I will say this. My son, who's 14, came into my bedroom, woke me up at 6:00 during December because he saw me making all these phone calls and working hard. And he said, "Dad, I want you to go to the bank tomorrow, and I want you to take $100 out of my bank account, and I want you to give it to your campaign."
Oh.
And it blew me away. It blew me because he saw what I was doing. He saw how I was working. He saw how important it was, and he wanted to do that.
Are you going to Tony Sanchez this deal and self-fund?
Well, I tried to take my son's money, but it turns out I can't take money from under an 18-year-old, so I couldn't even get that money. Okay.
But will you? Have you committed in your own mind to putting your own money into this race?
I absolutely will be supporting myself for sure, but I'm not in the Tony Sanchez category by any relation whatsoever.
Well, it didn't really work out for him, so that's probably just as well.
Yeah, but I will be investing in my own campaign, of course, but I'm not going to be able to carry the whole burden.
Okay. Let me ask you a last question here, and that is, as a practical matter, you get the nomination, you run against Abbott. If you were to win, which would be obviously a surprise outcome, you say it your way. In all likelihood, the legislature remains in Republican control.
No. I think when I win, just like in Virginia, right? The blue wave went across the entire state.
It would have to be a Sharknado for it to actually happen. Come on. I mean, you understand that in order for the wave to be that big,
I think that,
So the only way that you win is if everybody wins?
I don't think any one candidate, I mean, it's potential that one candidate could make their way through, but the issues that we're talking about are issues that are important to all Texans. And I don't think, Andrew White or Beto or Collier, they're all great candidates.
You don't think there are white Patrick voters, in other words?
I think people are going to vote for a change across the board. And so that when I am elected governor, we'll have the opportunity to really affect that change, because people don't just want to change in the governor's office, they want to change in the lieutenant governor's office as well.
So the question is, how does a Democrat governor with a Republican legislature and Republican agency, electeds running agencies, the question of how you do that is moot, because you say that's not going to happen. If I win, everybody else wins.
I would say turning the legislature is going to be harder, right? That's going to be harder. And this is where being a consensus builder who is willing to work across the aisle to make change comes into play. This is the value of...
And having a veto pen with ink in it.
And having a veto pen, but also this is the value of someone who truly wants to improve the state and wants to work with anybody, no matter what label they give themselves and what political party. If you want to make education better, if you want to see healthcare work, I want to work with you.
Okay, let's open it up for questions from the audience for the balance of our time. There's a hand in the back here. Agnes will try to get to as many of you as possible, and I promise if we have to stop by 9 o'clock, I apologize for not getting to you.
Yes, well, Rosemary Cook, and loved all of your answers. You got my vote, and I will do the $100 donation in place of your sign.
Hey, thank you.
Great.
And so,
what's your question?
My question is, how do you think, because I would be one of these, we'll call it a common sense Democrat, but really it is a conservative Democrat. I think there's a lot more of us than most people realize. How would you go after those voters? Because I think there's a bigger wave of those folks, because you can be pro-life and pro-choice, and we need to stop acting like that's not an option. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
Yeah.
So that I think it really is on the issues, and I think you are very data-driven, and you're, yes, absolutely common sense. So how do we get those voters to come out and, because a conservative Democrat's the same thing as a liberal Republican. They exist.
Yeah.
So do you make a conscious appeal for the so-called Strauss Republicans who may look at the things happening at the state level and think, this is real, I've been a Republican a long time, but this is a little bit too for me?
In Texas, those Republicans who've been Republicans for the past 20 years used to be Democrats before that, right? They're the moderate middle, and they use things like reason, and they feel very uncomfortable with the direction our state's headed today because of what Abbott and Patrick's done. Yeah. So your question is, the answer is being willing to work with both parties, I think is what people really want. They want the gamesmanship to stop, the sort of political behavior where you lob these verbal hand grenades at each other over and over, and you just dig deeper foxholes and just hunker down. They're tired of that. They want somebody to come out of the foxhole and work to make the progress. So
but again, does appealing to that middle and attempting to turn out that middle in any way depress the enthusiasm of the base, which is much more to the left of that middle, and at the moment seems like the energized part of the party? Can you straddle? Can you do both?
I push back a little bit on this, because I think if you look at the particular issues, there isn't a huge divide on some of these. There are obviously important differences, but we can put aside some of our differences to be able to make progress together and agree on some things too. We aren't willing to do that. We don't have leaders who are willing to put aside some of their differences to find ways to work together. And I think that's the message in November that the moderate middle are looking to hear.
Okay. Mr. Richards.
One of the contentious issues dividing Texans is climate change and what to do about it. Do you have a common sense plan for bringing the two sides together on this issue?
Right. Beyond the fact that you say you believe in climate science and Governor Abbott and others in state leadership don't, what do you do?
Yeah, sure. So climate science obviously requires us, we need to do something, right? I mentioned already about regulators, and I'm not going to repeat that again, but I live in Houston. I was in Harvey. I spent 5 days in the water, pulling people out of their homes, pulling people out of standing in the chest-deep water as it raged through. I will never be the same because of that experience. We need a governor who believes in climate change, because that experience is going to be happening over and over again. And you know what? If you don't live in the Gulf Coast area, if you're living in Dallas or in Amarillo and you think, well, I just don't get it, you have your own set of problems in Dallas and in Amarillo and in El Paso, right? It may not be a hurricane, but there's a whole other set of environmental problems that are going to start happening, and a government has to have the long view, right? So as it relates to the Gulf Coast, we need a third reservoir. We need a coastal spine.
Both of those are federal, though, spends, right?
Well, it's all of the above.
Right.
Primarily, it's a federal investment, but there's going to be state investment and local county investment as well.
Right.
But these are big dollars, but it takes long viewing leadership to make those kinds of decisions. It's expensive, but it's important.
Do you
And
follow
so-
Jerry Brown and other Democratic governors who objected to the president withdrawing or saying that he intended to withdraw us, because we haven't actually technically done it yet, as I understand it, from the Paris Accord?
Sure.
That basically, if the federal government is not going to engage with international actors on this, that states and state leadership has to do it in place?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work to be done on that front.
So you would do that? You would join
there's
with
work to be done on
other Democratic governors?
alternative
Okay.
fuels. There's work to be done on a lot of fronts. You have to care about the environment, whether you're a Democrat or Republican. We live here.
Ma'am.
So.
Hi, my name is Jen Ramos. You state that the data drives your decisions and that you may not like the data, but the data is important. Data indicates that the voting pool actually looks like me, a young woman of color. However, you've never actively championed for either one of these demographics. You pandered to the Texas Young Democrats with an insulting outreach attempt, refused to meet with reproductive justice advocates, and with all due respect, with respect to the audience in this room, you have difficulty bridging the gap with Latinx voters. Would you argue that the data is against you? And if so, why do you feel that you would represent people like me when you cannot be counted on to show up in these spaces?
Well, there's an awful lot in there. Do you accept the premise of that?
I don't accept the premise at all. I appreciate the question, but and I didn't catch all of it because there was a lot of
Can you say
information going
specific? I
through.
mean, I want to put the burden back a little bit on you. You say that Mr. White has insulted Latinx voters. Can you be specific as to how?
Not necessarily insulting Latinx voters, but when...
Isn't that what you just said?
I had mentioned that he had insulted the Texas Young Democrats with an outreach attempt.
Okay, what did he do specifically?
In particular, he had approached the president of our organization, and he had sent a relatively condescending email to which she had actually responded back and didn't appreciate his tone, and there was never really a dialogue and discussion. And I've read in your articles that you consider yourself the next generation of Texas Democrats. However, you've never actually reached with the official youth organization of the Texas Democratic Party.
You have a problem talking to young people in this party?
No, not at all. And I'm not really familiar with the instance you talked about on email or whatever, but if I did something wrong, I apologize. I don't know what it was, and she's welcome to reach back out to me, and I'll be happy to talk to her more about it, or him. But
Do you have any, to the broader point, are you concerned? I mean, look, there's a lot of enthusiasm and energy within the party among Democrats of color, clearly, and the population of the state is changing before our eyes. Do you have a concern about connecting with Democrats of color, specifically, as opposed to Democrats in the main?
Well, their issues are important to me, and obviously. And so I don't know where the background of what happened, as relates to your question, but as it relates to the issues in Texas, whether it be the racism that we've seen recently in Charlottesville, we need a leader who will fight against that sort of racism. We have in our own state capitol, we have a plaque that says this, the Civil War was not about slavery. The very first thing I do when I get inaugurated is turn around, walk back into the Capitol, and take that plaque down, because it's wrong and it's insulting. So this is my fight, and I care about your issues as well. These are all of our issues, and that's the kind of leadership that we need in the governor's office.
Question in the back, sir.
Good morning, Mr. White. I'm very encouraged on what you were just saying on some of these common sense issues, particularly education and healthcare. Those should definitely be priorities. I wonder, another topic I think a lot of Texans would agree with is that transportation is a big problem in this state, and potentially public transportation could be a big equalizer. What's your position on connecting the big cities of Texas with high-speed rail and providing public ways to get around those cities?
Great, thank you for asking that. I am in favor of high-speed rail. I'll do anything to speed it up. Can you speed up the construction of high-speed rail?
How about public money? Would you
No,
put public money into it?
It's completely privately financed right
Well, I know
now.
that the plan is, but would you be an advocate for public money being in the
I-
mix?
I'm happy with a fully 100% privately financed plan. I think we need more toll roads. Recently, our governor and lieutenant governor in the Austin area went backwards on a toll road plan on I-35, which I think showed very poor leadership. I mean, we're in the Austin-San Antonio corridor, you're decades behind where you need to be right now, and it's going to be a very difficult process to get where you need.
Is being pro-toll road a November election issue?
I believe that toll roads are important, but the thing is, when we all, I don't know if you're old enough to remember this, when we all agreed to toll roads, the deal was when you're finished paying them off, they'll be, stop charging you for it. And that wasn't what happened. They still charge you. I believe in toll roads that get paid off. And we need to figure out a way to make that happen on the ones that we have now and on the new ones. But the other thing that I need to talk about is self-driving technology. Under Governor Abbott's leadership, Pittsburgh is the capital of self-driving technology. Pittsburgh. I don't know how that happened, but Austin should have been.
Pittsburgh is nice, come on.
Yeah. But Austin should have been
Don't
the
hate on
leader in
Pittsburgh.
self-driving technology. What a huge missed opportunity, right? We haven't lost yet, and Austin's mayor is working hard to find ways to catch up on that. But we need to be thinking that far down the road. Self-driving technology is a huge deal, and in Texas, we should be at the very front edge of that.
Okay, question over here.
Yep.
Yeah, hi, I'm Marcy Purcell with Texas Adoptee Rights. We're a small, kind of a niche issue. We've been trying to pass a law for about 22 years in the state of Texas. And I was curious, since we're only 2% of the population, what are your strategies as governor to reach out to those minority issues, those ones that don't maybe make the top of the list that reporters cover and that sort of thing? What are your strategies to reach out to those smaller but yet persistent issues, 11 consecutive sessions that we've been working on this, to get that issue through, to get these people on the map and to get our voices heard in the larger Texas.
And what issue was it again? I missed it.
It's for adults to gain access to their original birth certificate.
It's adult adoptee rights.
Adults who
Okay.
are voting, tax-paying citizens
Right.
who
So-
have access to
Yeah.
Obviously, the thing that a governor faces is you have these big issues that are very public-facing and everybody talks about, but indeed, there are these smaller issues
Yes,
that you can
right.
choose to engage with or not. So
Right.
how
I
do
don't-
you balance all that out?
And I don't have an opinion on that issue, frankly. I haven't looked at it. So thank you for raising it. It's an important issue. It needs to be thought about. But I haven't thought about it yet.
But as a matter of process and of doing the job, you have to devote a certain amount of time to the issues that are not front of mind,
Sure.
big ones.
Absolutely.
So so what's your process for deciding what makes it onto your
Yeah.
list and what doesn't?
Time. I've been a candidate now for 30-something days, and you've got to prioritize and focus on the things that you need to focus on first. And the reality is, education and healthcare are those things.
Top of the list.
Yeah. So, but that doesn't mean that other issues aren't important, and I'd love to learn more about that one in particular.
Agnes, we have time for one more question back there.
Hey, Andrew.
Hey,
Late arrivers don't get dessert. You understand that?
I'm doing the whole 30 anyway.
All right, go ahead. Fine.
Whole 30. Good.
Andrew, my name's Ed Espinoza. I'm with Progress, Texas. I think you did very well today.
Thanks, Ed.
I have one question for you that I think would solve a lot, or at least reassure a lot of us in the reproductive rights community.
Sure.
You've said you believe that Roe v. Wade is the law of the land, and that you wouldn't have signed any of those bills that came through previously. And I think those are good answers. Can you commit to not signing any future legislation dealing with reproductive rights?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Any legislation that limits a woman's right to choose will be vetoed, plain and simple.
What does that mean? Can you be specific about how you define legislation that limits a woman's right to choose?
Well, the most recent one is one of the best examples, right? Where the legislature passed a law and the governor signed it that said, that told doctors what procedure they could not use. That's just insane. That a law would be passed to tell a doctor, a licensed practicing doctor, what they can and cannot do. Thankfully, the courts overturned that. But when I'm governor, those types of bills get vetoed. Anything that places an undue burden on a mother, and that's been established by the Supreme Court for decades. So thank you for asking it, Ed.
So there's no way that your personal view of this issue, which is yours, right? It's yours. There's no way that in any way impacts anything that you deal with as a
I
form
think
of
a lot of
legislation.
people share the same view on a personal level, but it's a personal choice.
Okay. That's it. Cut off. All right. I'm
Okay.
told we're out of time. Mr. White, thank you very much for being
Yeah.
here. If you get the nomination, come back. We'll do it again.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Win.
thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all. We'll see you again.